Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Steve Hewlett debate. As I'm sure many of you know, Steve was one of our very sharpest media journalists, and so every year this debate is dedicated to the industry's current hot button issue. And today we discuss duty of care. So I'd like to introduce our panel, a very esteemed panel. We have Angela JAIN, Managing Director of ITV Studios Entertainment. So I have to read this so I don't get your job titles wrong because they're all very long and complicated. You really have, yeah. She oversees, among many other big shows, Love Island, and until it was axed in July, The Jeremy Kyle Show. Jeff Brazier is a TV personality. He first appeared on TV as a reality contestant on Channel 4's Shipwrecked in 2001. And he was also the partner of reality star, the biggest reality star of all time, Jade Goody. Claire Sillery, Head of Documentary Commissioning across all BBC channels. Her output is huge, and it includes both documentaries, traditional documentaries, and more constructed shows, from Ambulance on BBC One, Louis Theroux and Chef's Brigade on BBC Two, and Glow Up on BBC Three. Tim HINCKS is currently the co-CEO of Expectation. That's quite hard to say. Well, no, previously, Tim was creative director and also CEO of Endemol, and it was it's a production company that obviously has made many, many, many shows, and he looked after many shows, but most pertinent to this session, Big Brother. And Kelly, who is also our festival chair, she's got a very long job title, Deputy Director of Programmes and Head of Popular Factual at Channel 4. Her recent commissions include reality show The Circle, The Restaurant That Made Mistakes, the forthcoming Sir Jury, which I've heard lots of talk about at the festival, and also Old Age Home for 4-year-olds. So welcome to you all, thank you for coming. Before we talk, let's take a look at some of the key programmes and events of the year so far. Thank you, Alex Mahon. Of course we care. As a producer myself, I don't believe there's a broadcaster or producer in this room that doesn't care very deeply about the people we put in our programmes, and we take our duty of care to them incredibly seriously, I think. But in amongst those quite crass accusations, we're packs of hounds, it's the Hunger Games, there are also some important questions that are being asked. Tim, what do you think?
Well, I think overall, I mean, just specifically on some of those MPs, and, you know, I think it's always been the case, and I've said this before, so if anyone cares, I'm saying it again, television has always been regulated by people, and certainly when it comes to MPs, scrutinised by people who don't watch it. And they're snobs, not exclusively, but there's snobbery about television. And so, whilst it's incredibly important, essential to be held to account, I think this notion that all these sort of mad, off-the-wall things are happening as we push people further and further is a trope that's been going on for certainly since the beginning of Big Brother. As I look around me, interesting, there's some ghosts from my part, not a particularly pleasant way of referring to some of you. I see people who have been on Big Brother in the past and other reality shows, and I'm struck. And one is always be very careful at Edinburgh not to be too self-aggrandizing, and, you know, it's important we push boundaries and question ourselves. But I'm struck by just reminding myself of some of those faces, how much people cared about the people in Big Brother, for example, and other shows. When I started in telly, sorry, this is not going to be long. When I started in telly, actually, let's make it long. It's an interesting story. When I started in telly, I had no conception of what telly was, and like many of you, I'm sure, didn't know anyone in telly, didn't know what was required of the job. What I realised was, and what I loved about it, and I soon discovered, is I get it. It's basically about persuading people to do things. That's what it's about. Could we film here a bit longer? Could we film on your premises? Would you take part in this show? And I think for years, that was basically the job of TV, to persuade people to do things that you felt was in their best interest. I think when Big Brother came along, that was questioned for the first time, because there was this thing famously now, I don't know about that famous, but the talk of doom, which is the first time you basically sat down with someone and said, this might not be the best idea you've ever had. In fact, in some ways, it might be the worst idea, and we should tell you about what's in store. Now, obviously one can question, was that the right time to do it? Were people listening and so on? But it was an important step to try and persuade people not to do it. And I think there is, producers do care, thought very carefully about the ramifications of what people did. I think before Ofcom decided to, regulate and or at least to start thinking about the new rules, it was happening anyway. Those reality shows, in a sense, invented a system of duty of care, and I think we'll go into it. Not perfect, but I would say to you, if you go into any other area of if you are doorstepped by the news, for example. I'm thinking of it's a terrible way to refer to them, the couple who had the drones. You remember that story? Yeah. If you're doorstepped by the news and become a public figure, if you decide to go into the music industry in a creative way, if you decide to go into drama as an actor or an actress, it is quite possible you will have a moment of extreme fame that will be dissected on Twitter, not always in the best possible way. And once that's over, nobody will come to you and say, how are you a year on? How are you 6 months on? There is no duty of care in those areas in the way that there is in what's sort of roughly called reality TV. And I think we can feel positive about the way that's done, but I'm certain there are ways to make it better, and it's evolving, and obviously social media puts a particular focus on that. I think
we'll pick up on lots of these themes, but thank you, that's really good. So you're saying we're doing it anyway, is your key point?
I'm saying this. No, I'm definitely saying it's evolving. So I'm not sort of complacently saying it's all in hand. But I am saying that notion that there's a duty of care was something that was broadly invented by broadcasters and producers before it was invented by regulators.
Good. Okay, Angela. So after the death of Steve Diamond, the cancellation of Jeremy Kyle, and now Ofcom's forthcoming new rules, do you feel the system isn't working? Do you think it needs overhauling?
Well, I think to pick up on Tim's point, this is also in the background of, thankfully, society talking more openly about mental health issues and well-being. And that's changed. Social media and sometimes the really febrile atmosphere that encourages and contains, it just means that our processes are constantly evolving. But I agree with Tim. We have worked really hard as producers who care very deeply about the participation of our contributors to safeguard their health and well-being. And it's constantly evolving. And, for example, in terms of Love Under, which we'll probably come to the detail later,
we will.
We engaged a chief medical officer 9-10 months ago in early autumn last year. So we are constantly reviewing our procedures to make sure that as the nature of the show changes, the context within which
So is that why ITV cancelled Kyle? Because it was no longer fit for...
Well, I mean, as you will see, there's been a select committee about Jeremy Kyle show. We've been really clear about why that show was cancelled. There's no point going over it again. I'm just trying to say to you that as producers, we are constantly looking and scrutinising our duty of care procedures to see if they're fit for purpose.
Good, thank you. So, Jeff, you're someone who obviously first appeared in a reality TV show on Shipwrecked, I think it was in 2001.
Yep.
And then earlier this year, you were also in another reality TV show, if we can call it that. It's a sort of elevated version of one, which is SAS Who Dares Wins Channel 4 show, and they did a celebrity version. I'm really interested to know, was the experience, the care experience, the way that the producers took you through the process, was it very different 17 years on, or was it pretty similar?
Yeah, no, very different.
And was it good?
Yeah, absolutely, both good. But when I was on Shipwreck, there would be no meetings with anyone before, and I don't think to necessarily sort of go over where you were at with regards to your mental health, nor was there a great deal of contact afterwards. It just wasn't. People didn't know that was what was required at the time, potentially. Whereas with SAS, I spoke to a psychotherapist beforehand, during, afterwards as well, a number of times, because obviously they're very, very careful to ensure that the process, which is one of the more extreme that you can probably experience, wouldn't have a profoundly negative effect on you.
Wow. And even though you're a celebrity, that happened to you, because it's interesting, isn't it, that they're all, we deal with ordinary people, but also celebrities, and they have equal vulnerability.
It's crazy to imagine that a celebrity wouldn't struggle with mental health. My personal observation is that the people that are celebrities are usually people that have aspired to be more than what their childhood or upbringing provided them with. There's an element of ambition and wanting to aim upwards in life. So actually, I would say that it's no coincidence that when you look at a lot of celebrities' backgrounds, sports people, actors, actresses, usually there's some sort of difficulty that they've endured that has made them want more, I think, anyway.
I know it's not, but that's a really fundamental point I think that Jeff makes, because I think when I talked about the snobbery, you know, what those early shows did, and I would say Big Brother more than any, but was it put working class kids or young people on the telly, enjoying themselves, living their lives, not the subject of a documentary about how terrible their situation was, important though those are, it was about them enjoying and expressing themselves. And I think many quarters of society found that abhorrent and offensive and thought that they were up to no good, and there was something very suspicious about that. And
I think shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be having this opportunity. Yeah. I feel that too. Kelly,
Ofcom, they're currently seeking consultation. I think Channel 4 haven't actually responded yet. But that aside, what concerns you most about this focus on duty of care and what it might mean for our sort of creativity?
Well, I think the first and most important thing to say is we all recognise, as everybody has already said, that duty of care is of paramount importance. I completely understand why Ofcom and the government care, why the Select Committee are asking us all about it. We have a responsibility to look after the people on our programmes, and I'm glad that your experience on SAS was positive. I think across all of our shows, those that are defined as reality TV and those that aren't, we need to have conversations with producers at the very beginning about how we're going to look after the people who take part in our programme. So this is the right thing to do. It's, of absolute primary importance to us as a channel, and I think to everybody as producers. I think that's right, we do care, it does matter. I guess the things that are really important to me from a Channel 4 perspective about how we respond to this as an industry, I would say are two things. One is we absolutely must not allow this to become about taste or scale or risk or creativity or innovation. So what I do not want is for producers to limit the ideas that they come to us with, the things that they want to do, the ambition of the programmes they want to make. What I would say to everybody is, please don't do that. Continue to think as creatively as you possibly can, and we will then work together from the beginning on how we can make those programmes in a way that protects the people in it. It would be totally wrong and perverse for that to be the outcome of this, and I don't think that's what Ofcom wants. So we're not going to respond like that, and I would say to producers, please don't. And I would add to that, I think all of us as broadcasters, but certainly as Channel 4, one of the most important things that we do is give voice to vulnerable people, people who otherwise may not have a voice. And that might be through documentaries, or it might be through reality TV. As you say, there are many ways in which people get to say the things they want to say through telly. And we need to continue to do that. We need to continue to tackle difficult subjects, to tell difficult stories, and to allow people who have gone through hard times, who have got mental health problems, who have experienced sexual abuse, who are homeless, for example, to tell their stories and to be able to have a chance to get their voices heard. So we need to work really hard to ensure that their experience is a positive one, but we absolutely must not limit our ambition to get those stories and those voices out there.
Brilliant, thank you. So Claire, obviously your focus is docs, although you make some constructed shows as well. What's interesting about Ofcom's new rules is they very clearly don't just apply to reality TV shows. If you look at the consultation, they're also, it's basically everything that includes real people. That could include a quiz show and obviously observational documentaries. Do you think the way we manage duty of care should be different in those different situations, and in what ways?
I suppose thinking about the sort of documentaries that we do on our slate, I would differentiate between an observational documentary like Ambulance or Hospital or Forensics Real CSI, one of those series where we're encountering people in their real lives, events happening in their real lives and documenting those events. And that is real, and something where we are constructing something for television, an experience. The shows we tend to do would be things that are like an immersive competition where it doesn't exist in the real world, something like Glow Up, for example, a makeup competition, but we invite amateur makeup artists to take part in it. And that, so those are different things. But all programmes that we commission at the BBC, whether it's through Docs or any department, will come through, it sounds really boring, it's our BBC editorial guidelines. And boring as the name is, it's a sort of an amazing thing, because basically it's like a repository, an encyclopedia of generations of programme makers and filmmakers, what they've learned on programmes. So every mistake that you've ever made, the correction to that is in those guidelines, and it evolves. And so it's like a framework that you can measure things against. And within that framework, we have a thing called, we call it due care, because it's due, because it's commensurate. When you're commissioning a programme, you would consider it commensurate to the contribution that the person is making to that programme. So the due care to someone who gives you a 1-minute interview in a programme is different to the due care to someone who is an extremely vulnerable contributor who you've been filming with for 6 months and you've made a documentary about their life. And that sort of, you know, when you're making a show, when you're conceiving of a show, the producing process sort of is, you're looking at it from the perspective of the viewer. What does this show look like on telly from this angle? And then it's, well, how do we make this show? So what does this look like from a production perspective? What are the researchers doing? What are the directors doing? How does it work? And then you turn the prism again to go, how is it to be on this show? What's my experience on this? What's this going to feel like? And that's what due care, that's part of due care. So it's not something that sits in a box with data protection, although I know data protection is very important. But due care is like the it's part of the editorial conversation. It's part of the DNA of the programme. Yeah. It's part of the purpose of the programme. So the short answer to your question is that due care,
it's different for every show has its own. I think we all think that, don't we? We devise an appropriate care protocol around every
producer.
But just like we make a show called Chef's Brigade for Claire. That very excitingly, quietly, just before it, Jeff said he'd watched last night and you enjoyed, I think, which really is frankly,
I love the chef.
Thank you, made my day. But so that's an interesting case in point, which is it's a competition, and we've done a psych process, and producers are on call to those to the people in it, and I think in a way that definitely wouldn't. It's a bit like what you said, Jeff, about Shipwreck. That would not have happened 10 years ago. And one of the key differences is social media, I think, and the way that people react and how quickly it reacts. If you think back to how appalling, I mean, unforgivably awful the press were to Jade in the way that they talked about her. It was ugly and brutish and disgusting. They were sort of over here somewhere in some way. Now it's people, it's viewers, the sort of hate that you get on social media is immediate. And I think one of the, just to very drill down into one particular aspect, there's a really interesting thing happening at the moment, which is we all like to promote our shows. We all have social media accounts. So we go, hashtag Chef's Brigade, isn't it great? I would do that, or as much as anyone cares what I think. But you know, you're part of that process. On that hashtag, there is also hate and abuse. And as producers, how we think about, we're now sort of, the thing is much more cohesive, right, in a way than it was. And I think that suddenly raises the stakes about how do you protect people from that, and is it our job to, and is it our duty to?
And not controlled in any way.
So with Love Island is a really interesting example, isn't it? Because actually there couldn't be more social savvy cast than the Love Island cast. So, you know, they absolutely live on social media. Does that make it easier or harder? And how do you actually protect them when, you know, this onslaught?
I mean, they're not all socially media savvy. Some don't come in with millions of followers. And what we have introduced now is social media training for them when they come out. Some of the stuff that is said to the islanders direct into their accounts is absolutely disgusting.
And can you do anything about it?
It's not we sort of give them the advice that we used to give talent, and we still give talent sometimes, along with their management and professional representation, which is sometimes it's quite good to take a break from it because it is such a febrile atmosphere, and it's so visceral, it's so direct, it's straight at you, and some of it is frankly disgusting and shouldn't be allowed.
Would require so much discipline on their part, because bear in mind they've gone on to Love Island to embark on this wonderful new journey, and this new life is there waiting for them when they come out, and obviously they want to engage and to take a break.
And it's different for different people. Different people have different experiences, different islands have different ways of dealing with it.
Yeah. But it's hard if you're 22 and spend your life on social media to suddenly stop looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard, but we are giving them social media training. We're hoping that's going to help. You know, they have a support network. We're putting in place lots of other things around it, and they do. A lot of them who then want a continued life of fame do have professional representation in terms of managers and agents.
But I think I think that's why Claire's point about due care is absolutely spot on. What we mustn't do is get a kind of tick box system around duty of care, where there's a sort of, this is what we've got to do, and producers come in and they think we've got to tick this, this and this. Every programme and actually every person needs a different kind of care. And if you're on Love Island, the care that you need is completely different to if you're on 24 Hours in A&E or, you know, even Bake Off. All of those programmes require proper thought by producers, by the broadcaster, by, you know, compliance, by editorial policy, depending on which channel you're making it for. But it has to be specific to the programme. I think we've got to be really careful about that, because if we jump to a response here, we may end up actually not properly looking after people. To properly look after people, we've got to think about every programme and every contributor individually. And, you know, that I think all of the broadcasters do that in their own ways. And certainly for us, we do take a case-by-case approach. That's the right thing to do.
We've all, I'm sure many of you, I certainly have been watching the Jade series on Channel 4. And it is really sort of interesting how things have changed. But from your perspective, Jeff, actually this documentary being on now, how does that affect you? And have you, you're in it, but have you watched it?
It's really unsettling. And no, I haven't watched it. From a tactical parenting point of view, it was about letting the three go out.
Just to be clear, so Jeff's got two children who were Jade's.
Yeah, they're 14 and 16 now. So whilst they are coming to the end of their childhood and they are probably able to take on board more adult themes, I don't think that they're quite ready to watch a large percentage of what has been shown. I don't begrudge any of the content that has been used in making of the documentary. Apparently it's particularly well made and people have no issue with that. But in terms of, is it the sort of thing that they can watch and be like, oh, you know, I feel like I know so much more about mum in a lovely sort of warm, memorial way, or just, you know, lovely way of looking back and remembering. It's not. There's a lot of really adult themes there that they're probably not going to be able to get their head around, or at least would be quite upsetting and anger-inducing. So for me, it's a real tricky challenge, to be honest. Tricky for me individually, even seeing.
Was it hard to decide whether you'd go on it at all? I mean,
yeah, completely. I'm always caught between not wanting to prolong the conveyor belt, or almost the right that the media feel that they have to not just Jade's life and her legacy, but also everybody that was ever around it. So I don't know whether you've noticed, but I haven't really ever done much for the last 10 years because I'm very careful to be respectful to Jade in terms of, making sure that the boys see that she's been remembered, and that obviously it's my job away from telly and away from any of the stuff that's obviously relevant to us today. But to me, it's just about the boys. It's about what they need. It's difficult that it's...
But you did agree to do the interview?
I agreed because I thought that it would be better when they watched that they saw me giving some really positive, glowing remarks about their mum. I thought that would be the right, as opposed to there being an absence. And Rob at Blast, who had tried many times to get me to be involved, and the boys for that matter, he finally hooked me in when he said, well, it's either your words or Jackie Budden's saying on your behalf. And obviously that definitely got me moving. So no one wants to be represented by Jackie. So
Tim, sorry, because we're rushing through time. It's flying by. Have you watched it?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, the two.
Were you surprised at? Well, I mean, frankly, the lack of duty of care around Jade, particularly when she went in to the celebrity Big Brother house and the Shilpa Shetty incident. You know, from a viewer's perspective, it looked like there were quite a lot of moments where she wasn't looked after properly.
On the show, you mean?
On the show.
Well, so when I watched
I know it's historic now, but it's just interesting to look back.
Yeah, no, of course. When I can't, you know, Jeff's in comparable position to me, and what you've gone through and how you think about it is the most important thing here. I think that, you know, when I watched it, lots of things, I'm sure, like some of the producers, very emotional to watch that, about what went through, what Jade went through. I mean, an extraordinarily dramatic, you know, I mean, on one level, there's nothing on television quite like that now, discuss, with that, at that sort of level. I felt, and I talked to various producers, you know, after it, you know, I think we felt, you know, would you do it now? You know, I think now, if you're doing that show now, I think there's no question that when that row erupted, Jade, in that case, would have left the house, right?
Yeah.
That's what would happen now. Right. That's what would happen, rightly or wrongly. I think at the time, it really wasn't something we felt was a difficult duty of care issue, because I think it was played through, Jade was talked to, and of course, Jade made her peace with it. I was on a panel with Jade about 3 months after that, and we talked about it very openly, and she'd said how sorry she felt about what she'd said, as she said publicly. But I think now you'd deal with it incredibly quickly, and you wouldn't have allowed it to play it out. One of the things about Big Brother at the time was there was this notion, this sense of allowing stories to play out. There's this sense of, like, you know, when a housemate was very angry or upset, you'd encourage them to go and talk to their fellow housemates. In some ways, it seems quite naive now when you look back about that process.
Yeah.
But in fact, it felt like treating people like adults, allowing people to discuss their issues in a sort of unmediated way.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So if it hadn't been invented, and in today's world that we're all now talking about, would you go and pitch a show like Big Brother?
I'd certainly pitch it, except it doesn't belong to me anymore. So it'd be a bit odd to pitch a show that belongs to another company.
Yeah.
But
as I said, if it
no,
hadn't...
but seriously, the first thing to remember is Big Brother was impossible to pitch at the time. I mean, it took ages, and Endemol had to put their own money into it being commissioned.
Right.
I mean, some people may feel good about that in retrospect, but you know, nobody really wanted it because it was incredibly revolutionary and innovative. So it was impossible to pitch then. I think you absolutely would pitch it now. If what you're asking is, would you pitch a show that got, you know, was that sort of detail in terms of the storytelling and the blending of technology, which is what it was. Basically, Big Brother's partly a story about technology, about the ability to deliver those stories rapidly. We take it completely for granted now with a circle and other things. But it's about, you and I have an argument, and 24 hours later, you can watch that happen like watching a soap opera. So it was an extraordinarily innovative show, and so of course you'd pitch that. I don't know what that show is yet, although I'm probably going to pitch one to Kelly just after this, because I think
Kelly, would you commission Big Brother now?
I mean, look, Big Brother, exactly as you say, was a revolutionary piece of television that completely changed the way we make telly, we watch telly. It spawned the Rig Show. It's, you know, there's the history and legacy of Big Brother is enormous. You know, we want shows that do that. So it's, as I said before, I don't think this is about limiting the types of shows we make or the ideas that we want, but it is absolutely, when we look at that, when I watched Jade, particularly that second episode, you do just think, ugh. There are so many things we would do differently now in terms of how it was made. And there are so many red flags when you watch that about how she was looked after, about how Shilpa was looked after, about how Jackie was looked after, that, instinctively, we would all just behave differently. I don't think there's any question about the fact that has just changed and we have changed with it.
What about titles? Because The Undateables, which is actually a show I love, that title in itself is quite difficult. Would you still use titles like that?
I would definitely. I think The Undateables is a brilliant title. And if you ask, you know, many of the people who've been on Undateables, that's how they feel and that's how people talk about them. And actually, if you look at the title sequence, the un falls off. If you watch it, they're absolutely clearly dateable. I think we've got to be brave about the people who we put on telly and the experiences that we show. I think Undateables has changed the way many people in this country feel about people with disabilities and how we respond to them in a really positive way. And the people who've been in Undateables have had an overwhelmingly positive experience. So for me, we have to be, as I've said before, we have to be careful about what we take this to mean. What it means is that we look after people. And I think when we look back at Jade, we didn't look after her in the way that we would now. But that isn't about whether Big Brother was a good series.
Yeah. But I do think it's worth saying that what I think that set. But I think the Jade. What's important to note is that in that case, the producers of that show and the broadcaster sat down constantly to talk about what that duty of care was. How, I don't accept that Jade wasn't looked after in that sense, because it was constantly discussed. But there was a way of making that show at that time which felt like you showed what went on. You know, you were open about what happened. But that precedent about a broadcaster and producer talking together, working out what's together, may change over time. But that was the important principle that was set there, and I think that's one we should feel pleased that is in place. You know?
So broadcaster and producer, we work together, and we continue to work together, and we drill down and work out these processes and protocols. What's clear to me, and my own experience tells me this, is as we take this more seriously and develop our duty of care processes around any particular show, there is a cost. And I wonder if this is a place which this is something which actually divides us. I mean, Angela, what do you think? Because these things are expensive. You know, adding a care producer that's there throughout the whole broadcast, which might be 6 months after you finish filming, you know, having them there for 6 months, making calls. How do we pay for this? And who pays?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and how long for? How long is, you know, we've instituted 14 months on Love Island. Is that long enough? Obviously, if a phone rings from somebody who's been in Series 1, we take the call and we deal with it. And that's 4 years ago. And I think you're absolutely right. It is a shared responsibility. It's a constant conversation between the producer and the broadcaster, but there is a cost to the business. And we all recognise that the duty of care is the most important thing, but who pays for it?
Claire?
I agree. I think with
Claire,
Glow Up,
who pays for it?
I think that we should be, that if we are having those due care conversations as part of the commissioning process, it has to be part of the commissioning process. And that, for example, on something like Glow Up, I know that we've just commissioned a second series of Glow Up, and it was really interesting on Glow Up because the contributors on that show, they're on social media all the time. They are all keen amateur. I don't know if you know the show, but it's an amateur makeup. People who are amateur makeup enthusiasts take part in a competition, and so they're on social media all the time. They share their material all the time. But it's different to own your own narrative on social media and then have a big broadcast narrative about your place in a competition being broadcast. And that actually they found that very difficult. And that we've put extra support in around that for the second series and put, I don't know, an extra 15 grand in to keep someone else on to look at the social media for 3 months after. And also, I think the other thing that we've put into that show is to make sure that we've got briefings for people about building a career in makeup, so that thinking about what do you get from being on this show, you know, because they care about this, they want to build a career in this, that this is something tangible and useful you can take from this show if you've been eliminated from the show.
Do you do that with Love Island? Do you give people advice on how to be a celebrity going forward?
Well, we give them social media training, we give them financial training, we offer them 8 sessions with a counsellor, there's a dedicated welfare team. I mean, all of this we've spoken about quite publicly, and we're going to constantly be looking at that because the environment with which the Islanders came out of Series 1 into, and now Series 5 into, and 6 and 7 and beyond, is going to be different, and it's going to be constantly changing. And we work really hard with ITV2 to make sure that we've got the best practice. And as we've all expressed, individual people's experiences in these different shows will require different levels of care. But
I think that's sorry.
I just wanted to say that I think, look, duty of care means many things. Some of those things cost money. Sessions with psychologists cost money. Social media training costs money. Some of it doesn't cost money. So proper informed consent doesn't cost anything. And I think we need to be honest about the fact that there are certain parts of looking after people in duty of care that doesn't cost anything. And actually informed consent for me is the nub of duty of care. When somebody agrees to go on a programme, it is absolutely essential that they understand what the programme is, what the programme makers are actually intending, what the broadcaster is intending, what, in anybody's best guess, the experience will be like, what the experience will be like afterwards. And on that basis, they need to then obviously go through their psych tests, go through their medical, whatever the show is. Those things do cost money. On the basis of that, they then give their informed consent. The informed consent is so important, and I think we need to remember and discuss that a lot. And that is something that happens in the process of production that doesn't cost anything. I also think, people get to know certain people on production teams over the course of their time on a programme. And actually, those relationships really matter. Yeah. And to continue to hear from people is also really important.
But that's the nub, isn't it? Because, I mean, we as indies, producers know that, most people who work on these shows are freelance. And as soon as you finish making it or shooting it or editing it, they leave. And so they won't be there.
But some
shows are on iPlayer for 12 months.
There'll be people in this audience who are still in touch with people that have been on shows they've had on. And in a sense, they're doing that. They're probably working for other production companies. And I think that's hard to quantify. And I think I'm about to say something very, very obvious, but I'm saying it anyway. I'm not stopping, which is if you put your life on, public record in whatever way, whether you're a celebrity doing a show or whatever that happens to be, it's complicated and social media, like times a million, because you may at the time feel this is a thing I'm comfortable doing. I don't mind, I know that if I have a row, it will be on television, whatever it is. A month later, 10 years later, you may feel very differently about it. And those things don't go away. And in a way, that's what you're dealing with now, Jeffrey, which is, it's on public record and you're thinking, how do you feel about 10 years later it being shown? And I think that, as producers, is a really, really difficult... I don't know what the answer to that. It's a really fundamentally difficult issue because it's not just about how long should that duty of care last. That is an issue. But it's also about how do we think about what informed consent means? How do we think about what it means when we're looking at someone saying, this show could be really exposing for you. Are you sure you want to do it? And they say yes. We're okay now, right? I mean, the answer is more nuanced than that, right? We know it's more nuanced than that, and that's why we're here, and that's why it's hard to pinpoint, absolutely clear ways of dealing with it, other than to make duty of care at the heart of what we do, to make the welfare of the people that do the shows with us at the heart of what they do. And like I was saying earlier, that it's not just about our jobs to persuade people to do things. If our job is to persuade people to do things, then we have a major problem, because that comes with a huge responsibility, and it has to have checks and balances.
So I gather that we're running out of time. Thank you so much, all of you. Just if there's one thing that is key to this for each of you, I'll go around the panel. So just very quickly, Angela, what is it?
I suppose I would like to see a sort of consistency of approach, but that is flexible and proportionate to the different programmes. And literally everything has been lumped into one nebulous blob of description, and actually I think it needs to be a proportionate response. I would say that, generally speaking, in my experience, TV producers do care and behave with great respect for the people that take part in their shows.
No tips or advice, just show some empathy, because you, Angela, put sort of 8 sessions on it as a number, and you might feel that those 8 sessions have given adequate therapy and support to the individual that struggled on the show with a particular issue. The problem is they're a few months later, and when those habits and coping mechanisms kick back in, and that individual potentially dips with their mental health, and if anything, should happen to that individual, the unfortunate thing is, much as you've given that aftercare, the finger of blame still ends up in your situation. I wonder whether that will end up resulting in you only choosing secure types, or as secure as you can see, for your shows, and it might mean that a Jade, for example, would never be given that opportunity again, because ultimately this care and aftercare is an insurance policy.
That would be awful. That would be awful, because what we all want is a representation of a diverse group of people. And the last thing we want to do is discount people. We can make adjustments for lots of different situations. But if it then means that the pool just becomes narrower, that would be a tragedy. It would be terrible.
Claire?
For me, it's just this issue of it remaining that everything to do with due care is connected to the editorial of a programme, that they are intertwined. And as a producer, you can care. For me, the blind spots happen. It's not about not caring. It's when the duty of care becomes unmoored from what you're trying to do, from the purpose of the programme. So it's really important that it doesn't become a box. And just one other thing I just wanted to mention. On social media, the thing that I think we need to have a really keen eye on, that I'm just noticing at the moment, is that we often generate assets that go with programmes. And you can look at an asset and go, this is factually accurate because it's been lifted from the programme. But if you pump it out on social media and it is isolating one characteristic about a person, and I haven't, as a viewer, I haven't watched that programme on social media, I see this, that is saying something about that person. Is that fair? And I think we need to have that all of the social media assets are part of the due care. That's all. That's
great. Tim?
Claire's had 2 things. I'm taking 3.
Sorry.
Very quick. No, I'm going 3.
Got
I'm
one.
actually going. I'm dialing
gonna
up
miss
very
their
quickly.
lunch.
Defend the right of people to appear on. As Jeff, it is not a crime to want to be on television or want to be famous or see that as a way of your life developing. If I may quote, as you all want me to, David Bowie at this point, when he was asked why did you become a singer, he said, I wanted to be famous, and then he got an exhibition at the V&A, so it's all right for some. So it's defend their right to do those shows, support them all the way. Having said that, support those, just as we're doing here. Talk about how do you support people? How do you, to Kelly's point, make it more nuanced? It's different procedures for different people, if you like. And I think thirdly, and the biggest of the lot, as in, like, this is a sort of an area that just takes forever to think about, which is thinking about how we address the issues with social media and how do we regulate that world? How do we look at trying to limit the damage and abuse that occurs on social media? It's a massive topic, but, it needs to be looked at and it needs to be addressed.
Kelly, quickly.
So I think the most important thing is to kind of recognise that we all do care and actually be bold and honest and defend that. The individuality, both the way that we approach individual programmes, but also how we approach individual people, I think is absolutely essential. And we have to defend people's right to have a voice and to want to tell their stories and to be on TV. I think that's really, really important. I do think that social media is the area where it's changing so fast, and we as an industry, I think, are still learning how best to look after people there and how to keep up. And that, to me, feels like an evolving conversation that we need to all together continue to kind of talk about what is best practice. We're certainly looking at that very closely at Channel 4, and we'll be doing workshops and sessions with producers about it. But I think all of us need to continue to have that conversation, because to say to people, come off Twitter, come off Instagram, is that really realistic? I think that's still an area that needs a lot of close interrogation and thought, which I know we will all do.
Brilliant. Well, that's all we've got time for, so thank you so much. That was really fascinating, and I hope you all found that useful. Thank you.